is justified from all things. In the words of that great gospel invitation, Revelation 22:17, whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely. Jesus is calling you this morning, my friend. Believe it. He's calling you. He wants to save you. He's willing to save you. He offers himself to you as your Savior now, today. And he calls to you. Put your name there. He says, come to me. Believe that. Rejoice in it. And simply come in your heart to Jesus Christ. And he will lift you up. And he will make you straight to begin to walk in newness of life. But as I close, there's one other character in this event. Wish we could just skip him, but he's there. Let's consider thirdly, very briefly, the ruler of the synagogue. The ruler of the synagogue. Now think about it. In order to be the head of this synagogue, this man must have been a very religious person. Wouldn't you say? You didn't get that position, without that. I can imagine only men of exemplary outward behavior, unquestioned religious commitment could ever be given such a position. But you see, my friend, you could be very religious, still be lost. And this was certainly the case with this man. Here was a man who was religious and outwardly moral, but blind to his own need and to the glory of Christ. He was religious, but callous to the needs of others. Religious, but completely missing what true religion is all about and who true religion is all about. So in verse 14, what was this man's response to this amazing miracle? We read, but the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation because Jesus healed on the Sabbath. He was indignant. He was upset. He was angry at this disruption of good order in the synagogue. And he was angry that such a thing would be done on the Sabbath. How callous this man's heart. Think about this. How blind. Does he understand what just happened? This poor woman's life has been changed. She's been delivered from 18 years of misery and bondage, and all he can think about is, this really upset our order of worship this Sunday. We don't normally do things that way, or this really isn't proper to something like this to be done on the Sabbath. She's been delivered from 18 years of misery and bondage. No wonder she's praising God. And no doubt some of the folks in the congregation were praising God with her. And in this man's mind, this was a terrible breach of proper decorum. And that's all he could think about. Not to mention the fact that his understanding of the Sabbath was completely wrong. You notice in the passage, Jesus doesn't deny the validity of the Sabbath. He never does that in the Gospels. He doesn't say that the Sabbath no longer applies and therefore you can just do whatever you want to do on the Sabbath. No, Jesus never does that in his teaching on the Sabbath. Instead, he restores the Sabbath to its proper intention. And he makes it clear in his rebuke of this man that the Sabbath is and has always been a day for doing mercy. Indeed, he calls this man a hypocrite. Hypocrite, he says, each one of you on the Sabbath loose your ox or your donkey from the stall, and you lead it to water. So ought not this woman, this fellow human being, this daughter of Abraham, who is much more valuable than your ox or your donkey, should not this woman whom Satan has bound, think of it, for 18 years, be loosed from her bond on the Sabbath? And Jesus exposes this man's hypocrisy for the wickedness and the callousness that it is. And we read in verse 17, and when he said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame. And all the multitude rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him. Brothers and sisters, it can be shocking sometimes how religious a man can be and even be in the Christian church or a professing Christian. How religious a man can be and still know nothing of Christ. In fact, don't be surprised that religious people can sometimes be the meanest, hatefulest, most